G'day. Ben here with another episode of Pushing 50. So today's episode we're going to be talking about some stupidity and scary moments during kitesurfing, of all things. We're going to start with electrocution. We'll move through to some sharks and then on to a hospital visit. So hopefully we won't take too long to discuss this today. Nice sunny day, Nobby's Beach, the northernmost beach at Newcastle, before the Newcastle Harbour in Stockton. And we were kite surfing in a nice nor'easter for most of the day. Towards the end of the afternoon, there was a storm front coming in from the west, which was still a good 30-40 kilometres away from the beach. It was still nice and sunny, not a cloud in the sky covering the beach. So decided, enough of the kite surfing. I'll do a few jumps around the beach. So load the kite up, launch into the air, and then, position the kite so I land nice and soft. So I did that a couple of times, and I noticed that the hairs were standing up on my arms. Should have been a dead giveaway there that there's a fair bit of static electricity in the air. But, just do a couple more. Just one more. It's always the way. That last one gets you. So down on the wet sand, doing a couple, practicing landings just to make them soft, and hard sand's a good way to make sure you're making a soft landing. So I've loaded the kite up. I've jumped, maybe 10, 12 feet in the air from my feet down to the surface. And as I came back down to the surface, about a foot away from the surface, I must have gained that much static electricity that I arced. When I say arced, I mean the static electricity, just like when you rub your feet on the carpet and you go and touch a doorknob, you get that little spark. Well, my spark was about that big, and it came out of my feet straight onto the wet sand, which absolutely jarred my whole body, and it was a very audible crack. Not quite lightning or thunder from lightning, but extremely audible, it, like the crack of a whip. And that sound was made by a giant 12-inch or 30-centimetre arc coming from my feet back to the ground. And there was light. You could actually see light around my body, apparently, because the electricity was flowing around my body to get into the wet sand. It wasn't a pleasant experience. I did put the kite down straight away after that, and lessons learned. I've never flown a kite near a storm before, or again, which I think one of the US presidents figured out with a key on the tail of a kite. But that's not that scary. But one day, we'll move on to some sharks now. One day I was at Port Botany doing some training before the Schick kite surfing competition, which was sponsored by Pfizer. Schick being the razors that you can buy that shave your face or your legs, as I did at a Red Bull competition to lovely ladies in New Zealand. But we won't go into that. The day was very light. There was not much breeze, and just practicing some light wind transition jumps. A transition jump is where you're travelling one way, pull the kite through the power zone, leave the water, and land going the opposite direction. So in this case, I was doing heel side jumps, so your classic sort of windsurfing jump, but landing what we call toe side. And I'm sure the wakeboarders out there will understand exactly what I'm talking about. So I did this jump. Wasn't very big, nothing flashy, just a transition. And lo and behold, landed the other way and lost a bit of power in the kite, which is not ideal because you start to sink a little bit. But I'm now toe side. My face is facing the water, and I'm looking at the front of the board. And we'll just wait for the Cessna 02 to go by. If you can hear that, I live near an airport. yeah, so I'm looking at the front of the board, making sure rails in, and underneath the front of the board, which is about a 1.9 metre board, which was made by Stonker at the time, one of my sponsors, and there was a rectangular thing under the water just sticking out from the side of my board, and I thought, what's that? It was, about 4 inches that way, 10, 12 centimetres even, and a good 8 inches or 20 centimetres out from the edge of my board. And I didn't know what it was. I had no clue what was going on. Then I sort of followed the rail of my board back and looked at the back of the board, and that's when I figured out that there was a shape of a body and a tail that continued past the back of my board for another 1.5 meters or so. So this was, about a third of the way down the board, or about 1.2 meters, and then there was another 1.5 meters at the back of the board, behind the board of this body, and it was a hammerhead shark. And I'm like, well, that's big. Quick guesstimates were roughly 2.5 meters, which is a big hammerhead shark. And yeah, funnily enough, if you go to Botany Bay, you'll see on the shoreline signs everywhere, and the signs say, beware of sharks. Anyway, water's water. They've got their domain. I didn't intend on going in, but at this stage, I'm sinking up to my knees and sinking slowly on top of this hammerhead shark, which has taken great interest in my board. Now, I sunk deep enough to actually come to rest on its back. So I felt myself physically stop sinking because there's no power in the kite. I didn't have enough power in the kite to be able to power up and get back onto the plane at that time. I was still recovering from a transition jump. So at that moment that I touched the back of the hammerhead shark, it did what I call a tail whip, or literally a 180 on itself, and smashed the front of my board with its tail that hard that it left an impression on the epoxy kiteboard, which takes a fair bit of effort to leave an impression on it. It's not like a surfboard with a couple of layers of fiberglass. So at that stage, I'm now shitting myself. I'm thinking this guy is going to come back for a go because I've upset it quite a bit. I concentrated on the kite, got the kite moving again, got a little bit of power, and managed to get from knee deep back up to about ankle deep, and started moving towards the shoreline. So I didn't stop at the shoreline. I just rode straight up the beach, and I'm a couple of meters clear of the shoreline at this stage. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking, that's one pissed off shark. He's probably going to be coming in for a look to see what hit him on the back. And there's two old ladies sitting there, because it was a hot day. They're sitting there on the water's edge, feet dangling out in the water. And I just sort of strolled over and said, look, I probably want to get out of the water at the moment because there's one pissed off shark out the back there, and I don't know if he's following me in because he's not very happy with me. They, I don't think, spoke much English. I think it was an older Greek couple of ladies, and they just nodded their heads and yes, yeah. So that was my scary encounter with what I believe to be a very big hammerhead shark. Definitely over 2.5 meters. So lots of teeth underneath that head. Now the next encounter with a shark, and there's the Cessna 02 going past again. If you don't know what a Cessna 02 is, it's a push me, pull you. It's got a twin engine, one prop at the front, one prop at the back, obviously doing circuits. So my next encounter with a shark was at Nobby's Beach, again, that same beach in Newcastle. And that particular encounter was late in the afternoon, doing training, great nor'easter, so 20 knots of wind, doing big jumps, and starting to get some of my tricks down. This particular trick, I was halfway through a double forward loop, and I was spotting my landing, and I looked down and I saw the silhouette of around about a 2 meter shape. You definitely recognize when you see great white from above what I'm going to land on. Juvenile great white, so it's roughly about 2 meters, probably a male, and I'm going to land directly on top of a great white shark. I can spot my landing. I know exactly where I'm going. So moments, like seconds, turn into hours when you're thinking about it in your head, because everything just goes overload, adrenaline overload, because I'm going to land on a great white shark. I managed to flatten my board for the landing, so I made a nice big slap on top of the water to try and scare the shark, which, well, I've still got 2 legs, so I believe it worked. As soon as I'd done that, I turned around, went straight back into the beach, and I thought, that's it for the day, I'm done. Warren was the beach inspector at the time. I went and told him that there's a juvenile great white cruising just beyond the breakers there, so they closed the beach for that afternoon. Civic duty done. Warren's a great fellow too. He helped me out of a few little issues. One of them is next on the agenda, and this is the hospital trip. Again, obviously we're talking kite surfing at the moment. I was at Nobby's. It was my favourite place to kite surf. They actually had a reef there, which is called Ben's Reef. Not after me, but I was kite surfing one day, and it was relatively high wind. So we're talking, 20, 25 knots of wind, slightly smaller kite. With higher winds, you get higher speeds as well. And I was beyond the breakers and just playing with the swell, sort of doing little jumps here and there. On one of those jumps, as I took off, the inside rail just caught a tip, which put me off balance, and that disturbed flying the kite. Number 1, fly the kite. Number 2, do the board stuff. It's just like flying aeroplanes. First you fly the plane, then you navigate. Well, I broke that rule, and I, for a split second, stopped flying the kite. It came back down into the power zone, which flung me at a high rate of knots, off balance, onto my side into a little bit of chop. So at first I didn't think anything of it. Like the first split second after hitting the water, I thought, because I bounced. But I didn't bounce. I actually looked down at my chest, and all my ribs on my chest were sort of pushed over at an angle. And I'm like, oh, that's not good. This is within probably 1.5 seconds. Then the pain hit, and I'm like, oh, because literally this lung had all the air pushed out of it. This one had tried to drag some air in, so some really weird stuff was going on with my with breathing, and very difficult. And I looked down, and my chest didn't go back to the normal shape. It was still sort of sideways. Now I'm about 50 meters beyond the breaker, so I'm probably 150 meters offshore, 100 meters offshore, and I've got to get back to shore. So I literally just dragged myself, because I've let the board go. I did have a leg rope on. I've let the board go. I've got my harness on, which is actually pulling up at an angle and not helping my rib situation at all. I've managed to angle the kite, so it's just dragged me back over to in front of the beach inspector's hut, pretty much, where I lay on the wet sand, dragged out of the water up onto the wet sand area, and attempted to basically ditch the kite. So I ditched the kite, and I was lying there, wheezing and hissing in pain, and wasn't in a good way. Warren, the beach inspector, he ran down to check on me, and I looked at him and said, I just shook my head. I said, not good, not good, not good. And a family saw what happened, and they'd come down to check on me as well. So I'm lying there in a wetsuit. Warren's collected the kite, the beach inspectors collected the kite for me and my board, sort of propped me up, and was ready to ring an ambulance. And I said, well, I don't have enough money, because kites were expensive and that was my passion, so I don't have enough money for an ambulance. You got to be kidding. I'm like, yeah, I probably do need to go to hospital. And this family of 4 people offered to take me in their car to hospital, and I still think of them to this day. So I'm helped up off the sand. We go into their, well, it was a pretty nice car. I can't exactly remember what type it was, but look, to me it was similar to a more modern Toyota Cressida. So the high end of the low sort of value cars, not a Mercedes or anything like that. I'm sitting there in a sandy wetsuit on their velour seats in the back seat of their car, and they drove me to the Mater Hospital, which today I'd still like to meet them and say thank you. So I get to hospital. I'm in a wetsuit, and that's it. All my gear is back with Warren at Nobby's Beach. So they walked me and helped me walk into the Mater Hospital, and nurses come out and take me away to an observation room, and they're like, well, you're going to have to get out of the wetsuit, so we'll cut the wetsuit off. And I'm like, hang on a minute. I don't have much money. This wetsuit's everything to me. I'll get out of my wetsuit. Rib cage is sort of straightened up a little bit. Still some serious pain on my left-hand side. I'm like, no, I will get out of the wetsuit. Don't cut the wetsuit off me. So with a little bit of help from 2 nurses, they helped me out of the top part of my wetsuit. After that, I could sort of look after the bottom half, and I could hear them talking. Do you think he's wearing anything under that wetsuit? I'm pretty sure they surf naked under wetsuits. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were just hanging around for the show. I was wearing underpants. So I managed to peel the wetsuit off and go for x-rays. Came back. X-rays came back at 45 minutes later. 3 cracked ribs on my left side. No lung puncture, which was good. No blood out of the mouth. But I said, so I'm okay. I've just got a couple of cracked ribs. Oh, yes, but you can't go. We need you to look for signs of dry mouth and if you're starting to feel lethargic. And I'm like, well, why is that? So with that serious impact, there's a chance that you've ruptured your spleen. And if that's the case, then the first thing you'll find is the dry mouth, and also nausea associated with that, meaning that I'd start to feel violently ill and start throwing up. Thankfully, after an hour of observation, I was given the all clear to be able to, as the O2 goes back past again, I was given the all clear to be able to go home and look after myself with a couple of Panadine Fortes. So that's my hospital visit due to kite surfing. There are others, but I'm not going to go into them at this stage. So thank you for listening again. Probably a bit of an uneventful one. I know a few of you out there are asking me for the Pajero story, which we will go into. after the aviation segment. Next segment will be aviation-related ways that I've nearly died, of which there's roughly 4 that we'll talk about. One of them is extremely serious, so thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next episode of Aviation Ways to Die from Ben at Pushing 50. Thank you very much.